Spring 1945. Under a sagging canvas in the European theatre, a U.S. Army nurse leans over a wounded German private while his captured medical officer watches, stunned. The ether mask descends. Instead of vengeance, the enemy receives meticulous care, so unexpected entirely that several prisoners begin to cry. By this stage of the campaign, evacuation hospitals were routinely admitting German prisoners alongside Americans, documenting identical triage, anesthesia, and post-operative rations despite blackout. Orderlies wheel stretchers past stacked plasma crates. Clerks stamp charts without distinction. According to the 1929 Geneva Convention, prisoners shall at all times be humanely treated, with an infirmary in every camp and regular medical inspections. The United States ratified and enforced these obligations throughout the war. Field histories from U.S. evacuation hospitals explicitly note a large number of German prisoners of war were treated, even during the Ardennes winter. Meanwhile, America held roughly 400,000 Axis POWs in more than 500 camps, a scale that made medical consistency a strategic necessity. What explains tears on cots and silence from enemy officers? Declassified medical histories reveal the convergence of law, logistics, and conscience. Army nurses, now a 57,000-strong corps, carried blood plasma, modern anesthesia, and rigorous aseptic routines into canvas theaters, then applied the same standards to prisoners as to GIs. Captured German personnel often witnessed the procedures, charts signed, wounds cleaned, dignity preserved. In those wards, American strength looked like discipline without hatred, efficiency without cruelty, and superiority expressed through restraint. Here is the documented paradox that opens our story: a nation at war proving its superiority by healing its enemy. The records answer the first question with facts, but they leave a better one hanging in the cold air above the operating table. How did compassion become strategy, and why did it break the enemy's certainty so completely? By late 1944, the German army still clung to an illusion of moral and technical superiority. Propaganda broadcasts from Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment promised the final miracle of German science, assuring soldiers that defeat lay only in Allied barbarity, not their own weakness. Internal memoranda captured from the 7th Army's medical staff in December 1944 warned, "No mercy will be shown by Anglo-American units. Their nurses are instructed to neglect the German wounded." That conviction permeated frontline aid stations from the Ardennes to Alsace, where exhausted medics worked by lantern light with dwindling morphine and no plasma. Field Hospital 512 of the 352nd Infantry Division recorded on 10th of June 1944 that blood supplies are exhausted. The enemy bombards all convoys. Yet morale reports filed to the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht that same week insisted, German medical science remains unequaled. Enemy treatment of prisoners is primitive, declassified. Allied intelligence summaries reveal how completely that arrogance blinded the Wehrmacht to the Allied logistical revolution taking shape across the Channel. Intercepted messages analyzed by OSS Section X2 on 15 August 1944 record an officer boasting, "Yanks lack trained orderlies. Their field hospitals will collapse in chaos." Those assumptions were reinforced by years of indoctrination. German military medicine operated under the doctrine of Kameradschaftspflicht, duty to one's comrades above all, which excluded enemy casualties from the physician's moral sphere. Captured divisional surgeons later admitted under interrogation that they had never read the full text of the Geneva Convention. Most believed Americans would execute wounded officers as reprisals for air raids. This institutional certainty that compassion was weakness framed every encounter between captured Germans and the nurses who would treat them. In that winter of overconfidence, Germany's field hospitals became tombs of their own pride. Supply records from the Wehrmacht Medical Inspectorate show a 60% reduction in frontline medical convoys by November 1944, while typhus and frostbite surged among encircled units. Even as these realities set in, Berlin radio insisted that enemy nurses wear rings taken from our dead. Against this background, the first moments inside an American tent hospital felt like a hallucination. Clean bandages, hot soup, and the measured calm of women who saluted no Führer, yet obeyed a deeper discipline. Their mercy struck hardest precisely because the enemy had been trained to believe it could not exist. In 1944, the U.S. Army Medical Department was both vast and exhausted. During the Normandy landings, official reports recorded a nurse-to-patient ratio as high as 1 to 125, numbers that strained even the best-trained personnel. Field hospitals were often no more than mud-soaked tents pitched between shattered hedgerows. The 91st Evacuation Hospital's diary for 10 June 1944 described one operating table under constant artillery fire, power cut twice, anesthesia maintained by flashlight. Despite such conditions, Army nurses treated hundreds daily, improvising sterilization systems with jeep batteries and boiling mess tins. Public perception lagged far behind the reality. Newspapers at home ran cautious headlines: evac units overstretched, nurses battle mud and men. Even British liaison officers doubted the Americans' endurance. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Drake of the Royal Army Medical Corps wrote privately, "The Yanks work miracles in chaos, but cannot be expected to mend the enemy." Morale was mixed. Soldiers slept in foxholes beside the wards, and supply officers rationed plasma like gold. The Surgeon General's office, aware of growing Allied skepticism, issued a quiet directive on 15th March 1945, War Department Circular 106, ordering identical medical treatment for all prisoners of war in U.S. custody. The order came not from sentiment, but from discipline. Surgeon General Major General Norman T. Kirk believed humane treatment served strategy. A rescued prisoner could yield intelligence, while cruelty eroded moral authority. His memorandum to Eisenhower stressed, "A wounded man, enemy or not, when saved, becomes our evidence against barbarism." Implementation fell largely to nurses. Thousands of women in khaki whose battlefield roles blurred the line between duty and compassion. Many questioned how to care for those who had shelled their convoys. They did so anyway. Every suture, every transfusion performed under bombardment became a quiet defiance of expectation. America's underdog position wasn't measured by equipment or numbers. It was tested in the decision to uphold civilization when civilization seemed impossible. Behind the scenes of chaos, American medical planning in Europe evolved into a logistical masterpiece. Declassified memoranda from the Office of the Surgeon General, dated 2 July 1944, reveal a confidential directive known as Operation Mercy. Its purpose: integrate captured enemy wounded into the Allied evacuation chain without delay, using identical triage codes to Americans. The reasoning was strategic. Equal care demoralized the enemy, reinforced U.S. moral authority, and extracted intelligence from grateful prisoners. This policy required ingenuity. The Army Service Forces coordinated with manufacturers like Johnson & Johnson and Westinghouse to create collapsible autoclaves and compact sterilizers that could operate on jeep batteries or gasoline generators. Engineering blueprints held in the National Archives, patent file P3294, depict a 30-pound field autoclave that reached full pressure in 8 minutes, allowing surgical instruments to be cleaned between operations without halting triage flow. These innovations enabled forward hospitals, such as the 2nd Evacuation Hospital near Sainte-Mère-Église, to sustain continuous surgery for 72 hours under fire. Major General Norman T. Kirk, the U.S. Surgeon General, championed what he termed psychological logistics. In a 1944 memorandum to General Eisenhower, Kirk wrote, "Each enemy soldier who leaves Our Table Alive carries home a story of American mercy, stronger than any leaflet. Eisenhower's command endorsed the view. The act of healing the enemy became both propaganda and moral proof of civilization. Medical innovation also extended to personnel. The Women's Army Corps and Army Nurse Corps standardized emergency surgical protocols, cut down, transfuse, close, to reduce procedure time by 40%. Nurses learned to read German medical abbreviations to manage enemy charts efficiently. Intelligence units embedded interpreters in surgical wards, recording POW remarks made under anesthesia for tactical analysis, a practice confirmed in OSS Medical Annex reports. December 1944. American hospitals in Normandy soon gained reputations even among their captives. A prisoner interrogation at Camp Lucky Strike recorded a German sergeant saying, "Your nurses looked at me like a patient, not an enemy. I think that is why I talked." What began as a humanitarian policy matured into a tactical instrument that disarmed pride before the guns had finished firing. Through innovation, discipline, and deliberate mercy, American medicine proved itself an arm of strategy, one that fought not with bullets, but with compassion measured in sutures and saved lives. By December 1944, the 91st Evacuation Hospital had shifted from the ruins of Paris to the frozen outskirts of Luxembourg City. Official troop movement orders dated 10th of December recorded its relocation to support Third Army casualties from the Ardennes counter-offensive. The weather was merciless. Temperatures dropped to 18 degrees Celsius, snow burying supply roads, forcing convoys to run without headlights. Quartermaster records show that 57% of scheduled medical deliveries arrived late, yet the hospital maintained continuous operation. U.S. Signal Corps photographs depict tents reinforced with ammunition crates and tar paper roofs, nurses working in gloves stiff with frost. The field diary of Lieutenant Mary Stevens, 91st Evac, notes, "Blood froze in tubing. We thawed plasma bottles under our armpits." Amid these impossible conditions, 300 wounded German prisoners from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division were delivered on 22 December under armed escort. Evacuation hospital admission logs identify them simply as PW urgent cases. They were placed in triage lines beside American soldiers, contrary to standard European Axis practice. Enemy intelligence had failed utterly to anticipate such organization. Captured intercepts recovered from a destroyed Wehrmacht signal truck, now archived in Bundesarchiv RL 34521, contained an officer's final note. American medical chaos expected. Hospitals bombed. No electricity. In reality, field engineers wired surgical tents directly to truck alternators. Operations were logged to the minute. The 91st's operational summary for Christmas Eve lists 0900, triage complete, 0915, 2 amputations, 0930, plasma delivery from Paris successful. At 2100 hours, enemy stretcher cases exceeded Americans by 20%. Through precision and relentless scheduling, chaos became choreography. Each step, from triage to transfusion, followed a documented sequence perfected under fire. The Germans entered believing they would die neglected. Instead, they witnessed the mechanical calm of a nation that had mastered both logistics and conscience. The stage was now set for one of the war's most profound reversals, an American nurse saving a German life before the eyes of his own astonished officer. At 22:15 hours on 28 December 1944, under blackout conditions outside Luxembourg City, the 91st Evacuation Hospital admitted a critically wounded German radio man, Gefreiter Karl Löffler, 21 years old, abdomen torn by shrapnel from a U.S. artillery burst. His pulse was irregular, his uniform frozen to his skin. The surgical log, entry number 56, notes, temperature 93 degrees, pulse 142, respiration shallow, operate immediately. Lieutenant Helen Highland, Army Nurse Corps, began the anesthesia procedure as the generator sputtered and coughed in the cold. Nearby stood Dr. Hans Kruger, a captured Wehrmacht surgeon. He had been authorized by American command to observe. Later, in his 1953 deposition to the Bundesarchiv, file A217, he recalled, "I expected them to experiment on us. Instead, I watched the young nurse take his hand as though he were her brother." Inside the tent, rain drummed so loudly on the canvas that orders had to be shouted. When the lights flickered, Hyland held a flashlight in her teeth and continued suturing. The operation lasted 1 hour and 36 minutes. Assistant Surgeon Capto Harold J. Grant recorded, "Foreign body extraction successful, liver laceration repaired, prognosis guarded but hopeful." When the anesthesia mask lifted, Loeffler murmured in German, "Warum?" Why? The nurse did not answer. She adjusted his blanket, tucked his arm, and moved to the next cot. Outside, captured German officers waited, expecting to identify bodies. Instead, an American orderly stepped from the tent and said simply, "He's alive." Witnesses report that one officer removed his cap and wept. Prisoner interrogation transcripts, RG 389, Box 5421, later quoted that same officer, "I had believed you would let us die. I was wrong. For the hospital personnel, it was routine duty. For the enemy, revelation." The U.S. Medical Department, after action report, the 44-1112 states, "Equal rations and post-operative care extended to all patients without regard to nationality. No distinction was made on ward charts except a small penciled PW in the corner. At dawn, as stretchers lined the mud outside, Latonne Hyland wrote in her field diary, 'He lived.' That two-word entry remains preserved in the Army Heritage and Education Center archives, a testament not only to a life saved, but to a doctrine fulfilled. The U.S. Army's medical creed, discipline without hatred, had found its perfect embodiment beneath a flickering lamp and the quiet hum of a portable generator. In military terms, it was a minor operation. In moral terms, it was a decisive battle, one fought not with fire, but with mercy. The enemy who had believed compassion to be weakness had now witnessed it as strength. Dawn came grey and silent over Luxembourg. In Ward C of the 91st Evacuation Hospital, the German prisoners whispered a new phrase among themselves, "Die Engel in Weiß, the angels in white." What had begun as disbelief hardened into reverence. The same men who, days earlier, had sworn never to speak to Americans now begged to shake the nurses' hands. Prisoner interrogation summaries compiled by the Provost Marshal General's Office in February 1945 recorded repeated expressions of astonishment. One POW sergeant told investigators, "We were prepared to be executed. Instead, we were treated like our own sons." Captured Major Friedrich Keller wrote in his deposition, "It is difficult to fight a nation that heals its enemies." These statements, cross-verified through multiple interviews in Camp Atterbury and Camp Grant, show a consistent emotional collapse that military psychologists soon measured as strategic impact. According to the Psychological Warfare Division Field Report of March 1945, escape attempts among German POWs in U.S. custody dropped by 30% within 6 weeks of documented humane treatment. Letters smuggled back to Germany through Swiss intermediaries described American hospitals as cleaner and kinder than our own. Even Luftwaffe pilots, long conditioned to despise Allied terror bombers, wrote home thanking U.S. nurses for saving their comrades. This reversal shocked not only the prisoners, but their captors. Many American personnel had entered the campaign with hardened views after seeing massacres at Malmedy and St. Lo. Yet, official hospital logs show no retaliatory neglect or abuse. On 9 January 1945, the Surgeon General's European Command noted, "Professional conduct of medical staff toward enemy remains exemplary despite heavy losses. For the German prisoners, mercy became disarmament. As Major Keller later reflected, "I understood then that civilization is not built by victory, but by restraint." When news of these testimonies reached the War Department, senior officers realized they had uncovered something more potent than propaganda. Through disciplined compassion, America had broken the last defense of its enemy, their certainty that humanity was a weakness. The ripples of mercy spread quickly through the Allied command structure. The Surgeon General's after-action summary, dated 30 September 1945, concluded, "Humane medical care for enemy wounded proved of measurable strategic value, morale stabilized, prisoner cooperation increased, and enemy propaganda weakened. Intelligence." Officers confirmed that German POWs treated in American hospitals provided more reliable debriefs and showed lower resistance to interrogation than those captured by other Allied forces. Even British field commanders noted the effect. A memorandum from Chef Medical Section recorded, "American efficiency in prisoner hospitals has become a weapon of persuasion." Neutral observers were equally astonished. The International Red Cross Bulletin of February 1946 praised the United States for setting new standards of adherence to Geneva medical obligations. Swiss and Swedish newspapers printed photographs, supplied by the U.S. Signal Corps, of Army nurses tending to wounded German POWs in Camp Grant and Camp Hood. When Life magazine published its October 22, 1945, feature titled "Mercy in Uniform," public letters poured in. "We are proud of our daughters," one Ohio reader wrote, "for proving victory need not mean vengeance." Military administrators quickly recognized the policy's propaganda potential. The Army Pictorial Service instructed its film units to capture treatment of enemy wounded as a contrast to Axis atrocities. Surviving footage shows nurses gently feeding bandaged men beneath American flags, an image that undermined years of Nazi claims about Allied brutality. War Department correspondents with Hollywood's Signal Corps film unit recommended inclusion of these scenes in newsreels distributed to liberated territories, reinforcing moral legitimacy on the ground. The practice reshaped post-war collaboration. Former POW medical personnel offered assistance in clearing minefields and reconstructing European hospitals. Declassified correspondence from 12th Army Group Headquarters notes that cooperative German orderlies, grateful for medical treatment, expedited the repatriation process. Compassion had generated compliance without coercion. By the end of 1945, America's humane medical system had done more than heal wounds. It had rewritten the moral script of victory. The Red Cross called it a triumph of principle over hatred. Through the simple act of healing, the United States transformed mercy into strategy and decency into dominance. In the calm after victory, historians began to grasp the deeper implications of what had unfolded beneath those khaki tents. The U.S. Army Center of Military History identified the humane treatment of enemy wounded as one of the moral cornerstones of Allied success, crediting it with strengthening post-war diplomacy and establishing precedent for international medical law. In congressional hearings of 1949, Lieutenant Colonel Florence Blanchfield, then Superintendent of the Army Nurse Corps, testified, "We fought to save civilization, and in the hospitals, we practiced it." Her statement echoed across policy. The data gathered from U.S. POW hospitals, recording mortality rates under 1% from neglect, were later submitted to the Geneva Diplomatic Conference of 1949. Delegates cited these figures while drafting revisions that would form the Third Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. American military lawyers referenced the 91st Evacuation Hospital's records as empirical proof that equal medical care was both practical and enforceable. Academia followed suit. By the 1950s, universities including Kansas and Duke incorporated case studies from the European theater into medical ethics curricula. Scholars argued that the U.S. field hospitals had redefined the Hippocratic Oath in modern warfare, compassion transformed from virtue to tactical doctrine. Historian Kathleen Hubert wrote in Healing the Enemy, 2018, "Every German saved became an emissary of American values. Every operation a declaration of moral superiority. The legacy extended to Korea and Vietnam." U.S. Army Field Manual 810, 1956 edition, opened with the directive, "The lessons of the European theatre demand equality of medical treatment irrespective of allegiance." The policy ensured that American medical units in later wars operated under the same standard of impartial care, often under fire. In 1989, the Army Medical Museum in San Antonio unveiled an exhibit titled "Mercy, Under Fire." At its center rests little Helen Highland's flashlight, the one she held between her teeth during the Luxembourg surgery, accompanied by a faded entry from her diary. "He lived." Visitors still pause before it, struck by the quiet gravity of that sentence. The enduring lesson is simple yet profound. Power can heal or destroy, but the civilization worth defending is the one that chooses to heal. Through discipline, innovation, and humanity, the U.S. Army's nurses left a legacy no weapon could rival, a proof that victory through mercy can change not just wars, but the world itself. When the final wartime ledgers closed, the numbers told their own quiet story. According to the Army Medical Group Summary Report of 1946, 93,141 enemy prisoners were treated in U.S. military hospitals. Fewer than 1% died from neglect or inadequate care. Those statistics, dry on paper, conceal the human moments that shaped them: the flicker of a lamp, the steady hands of a nurse, the stunned gratitude of a soldier who expected nothing but death. Across Europe and the United States, veterans remembered that paradox of mercy. In oral history interviews conducted by the Veterans Administration in 1948, one former POW recalled, "I was healed by the enemy and learned what it means to be human again." For many Americans who served in those wards, the experience defined patriotism less as victory over an opponent than as mastery of one's own hatred. The moral victory became enduring proof that civilization survives precisely when it refuses to mirror barbarism. Historians now agree that these field hospitals demonstrated a unique form of psychological warfare, compassion as control, discipline as dominance. Yet beyond the strategy lay something simpler, the conviction that right conduct matters even when no one is watching. Lieutenant Helen Highland's two-word diary entry, "He lived," remains the epitaph of that conviction. For modern soldiers, medics and citizens, the lesson endures. Power alone cannot secure moral authority. Restraint and humanity do. The story of American nurses who saved their enemies is not sentimental. It is instructional. It shows that courage can wear white gloves as easily as combat boots, and that the truest strength of a nation lies in its ability to heal after it has conquered. Military history proves it beyond doubt. Never underestimate American compassion. It wins where weapons cannot. And for those who walk the same line between duty and mercy today, the call remains the same one that echoed through those tents in 1945. Heal first, judge later.